Welcome everyone to our legislative updates and next steps session of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Conference. For many of us, following politics this year has felt like being on a roller coaster. There have been a lot of ups and downs, a few surprise turns, and in general, it's been hard to know what is truly going on and what may happen next. Through it all though, the CCL DC staff, led by Dr. Danny Richter, have done a wonderful job of keeping us calm, informed, and focused on the path ahead. In just a moment, Dr. Richter will be providing the latest legislative updates from the Hill and will be outlining his thoughts on the next steps we can be taking in our climate advocacy. For many of us here at CCL, Dr. Richter needs no introduction. But for our new friends in the audience, Dr. Richter was our first DC staff member and has been paramount in developing our legislative strategy and policies since. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our VP of Government Affairs, Dr. Danny Richter.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm going to give you a legislative update and highlight some next steps. I want to cover the political landscape in a nod to the theme of this conference. I want to talk a little bit about allyship and how we're building community with other groups in DC, in the DC office. I want to address inflation a little bit because that is a hot topic in politics today. And then I'll talk briefly about what's next, focusing on action. So first of all, I do want to introduce myself because not all of you have met me. So just to maybe refresh some memories and for those who haven't met me, tell you a little bit about myself. I've been with CCL a long, long time. I think that I am the longest serving active CCLer anywhere. I joined in May of 2008. I ended up founding chapter 5 or 6. And as a volunteer, I was a volunteer for 5 years. I reviewed legislative text. I provided opinions to Marshall, our founder, and I told him, Marshall, you realize I have no idea what I'm doing. And he said, yeah, Danny, just tell me what you think anyway. I ended up with positions papers for CCL. I traveled to DC 5 times to lobby. And by the time I was done, I'd had 75 meetings with congressional staff. And so I was one of the most experienced lobbyists in our organization. And so then they sent me to DC. I said, sure, I'll try and figure out how to do that. So without anybody to tell me how to do my job, I faked it until I made it. And my main duties now as the Vice President of Government Affairs include developing our political strategy and our written policy defense. I'm our lobby coach in chief, setting our primary asks and supporting asks. I develop and maintain relationships with NGOs in DC as well as my staff. And I'm an organizational liaison for researchers. It's a bit of an oddity, but I also manage our research department and provide expertise on technical topics. So that's a little bit about me. Political landscape. I want to start with a little bit more introduction for those of you, again, who are not as familiar with CCL. We focus here on 2 goals. The first is to create the political will for a livable world. And one thing I always like to highlight there is creating something is really hard. It takes a lot of sustained effort. And so there we understand that we're trying to do something difficult. And then our second goal is to empower our volunteers to experience breakthroughs and exercising their personal and political power. And for me, that word breakthrough, I've always thought of what we're breaking through as our company. I see it as part of our mission to make our volunteers continuously uncomfortable, to push them beyond their comfort zone, because that is where the magic happens. That's where you really experience that growth in personal and political power. We're very unusual in that we have focused primarily on one policy, which is the passage of carbon fee and dividend. We do believe this to be the best first step to a livable world. And also very unusually, we have one rule for ourselves, and that is if you can't express appreciation and respect for your elected officials, you can't call yourself CCL. And this is really hard. It's something we always have to be working on, volunteer and staff, but it means we need to really look at people we disagree and do the work ahead of time to figure out where we have common ground. And just one way to understand an organization is to figure out how they how they count success. And so here are some highlights from last year, from 2021, ways we measure success. Our meetings with members of Congress, over 1,000, our op-eds, better than 2 a day, 727, letters to the editor or LTEs, 2,437, outreach events, 1,554. I want to thank everybody in the audience who contributed to that. Usually in a non-pandemic year, that's a couple thousand numbers higher, and so it's particularly difficult, but you all are still making it happen. So thank you. 597 chapters worldwide. We've come a long way since I founded chapter number 5 or 6. GCSA is the Growing Climate Solutions Act. This is a bill with climate solutions in the title, and that passed the Senate by a vote of 92 to 8. 92 to 8. So that means Mitch McConnell voted for it. You actually had more Republican votes than Democratic votes for that bill. It was a pretty impressive feat. We're very proud of that. We see that as a sea change. And then 93 co-sponsors on HR 2307. That is the current iteration of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So that's some of how we count our successes. And then getting a little bit more detailed, bills that we have advocated for that have passed: the BEST Act, the Use It Act, and the Climate Ready Fisheries Act, all passed as part of the COVID relief package in December of 2020, signed into law by President. So really succeeding in being a bipartisan organization. The SCALE Act, which has to do with infrastructure, carbon capture and sequestration infrastructure, that passed in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework Package, or BIP. And then bills that have passed one chamber. Hope for Homes has passed in the House version of Build Back Better, and the Growing Climate Solutions Act, as I mentioned, that has passed the Senate. So we're on a roll. But let's talk about the current political situation right now, because it is wild. So right now, President Biden has signaled a shift in focus for the reconciliation bill. And I have a little note there, not Build Back Better. He had been calling it Build Back Better, but our latest from the Hill is we shouldn't call it that anymore. Just refer to it as the reconciliation bill. It is going to be smaller. So it is not going to be the $3.5 trillion that President Biden originally wanted it to be. It is not going to be the $1.875 trillion that it was shrunk down to, and which Senator Manchin said he could get behind. It will be even smaller than that, less than $1 trillion would be my guess. But they're trying to figure it out. So they are breaking it into, to use President Biden's word, chunks. And the big chunks there are you have the climate provisions, you have the family provisions, and you have the healthcare provisions. And so the climate provisions are the ones that have the most agreement. Those are the ones that are definitely going to be anything that passes. And so when you hear the word chunks from President Biden, that's what it means. He doesn't mean multiple reconciliation bills. There's still only going to be one reconciliation bill. The timeline for this is a matter of months, but Congress is so busy right now. There's so many things that Congress has to get through, and here's just a brief list. They have to get through President Biden's Supreme Court pick. They have to fund the government by February 18th. There's the State of the Union on March 1st. There's appropriations coming up in April. There are electoral college issues. There's the China bill, and then there is the evolving situation between Russia and Ukraine that is certainly drawing a lot of attention. So Congress is really busy. And so this brings us back to what's going to be in reconciliation. As I mentioned, Democrats are looking to trim down the bill. And like I said, there are indications that the $555 billion in climate provisions are a point of agreement. Speaker Pelosi in the House and Bernie Sanders, the chairman of the Budget Committee who started the reconciliation process, they've pointed towards a primarily climate or all climate bill. Senator Manchin has signaled support for the climate provisions, saying that those are the provisions that are probably easiest to get agreement on. And even President Biden has signaled that that is what they should start with. So there is I would still have to say, a low probability of a carbon price getting in that, but it's not a zero probability. One thing that President Biden and Joe Manchin have also said is they've said they want any bill to be fully paid for. But right now, if it does end up being just the climate provisions, the only quote unquote pay for provision that actually raises money and can pay for the spending, the methane fee, that is not going to be big enough to pay for even $555 billion. And one thing that you could do is you could have a carbon price, a carbon fee. And so this is a potential scenario. Again, this is not likely, but non-zero. With the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, for example, you would expect to raise about $2 trillion over 10 years. You could take a quarter of that revenue, fully fund the climate provisions, and that would leave 3/4 of the revenue to be distributed as dividend payments. So this is a potential scenario. I don't know if this is being discussed, but it is still within the confines of what has been discussed. So we're not out of this yet. And then, so again, the President, the Speaker of the House, and Joe Manchin have publicly expressed interest in pushing the climate provisions over the finish line. So that's a success. If any part of reconciliation passes, it will be the climate. There is uncertainty surrounding whether or not a carbon price will be a part of that. But if Congress can get something done on reconciliation, it will be a win for climate advocates. So we, as climate advocates, we have to be feeling good that climate is the first one in the bill. And we have to be pushing to try and make sure that a carbon price is also a part of that. Low probability, but not zero probability. So that's how I'd summarize the current legislative moment. Now, the title for this conference, Charting a Course, I want to talk about charting a course together and how in the DC office, we have been working, we actually have a couple of coalitions that we've been pulling together and leading. And I want to talk about one of them, which we pulled together in March. And this has been a really interesting process for us. And I haven't spoken about this publicly, so you're getting an scoop. But the way we got this going is we first had individual conversations with 5 groups who were engaged in a carbon price or who we felt would absolutely had to be a part of on board to move something forward. We had individual conversations with them. We asked them, what would you find useful? If we were to have a weekly call and you were to be involved, what would you find useful? And we agreed on parameters. We agreed on how we were going to, yes.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but we're getting enough concern about your sound that perhaps, I don't know where your sound, the fuzzing is coming from. One option might be to not move so much. The other option might be to cut your video. You have a lot of valuable things to say.
I will cut my video. I'm going to cut my video. And Sabrina, please do interrupt me again if this doesn't get better. I adjusted the boom on my mic, so hopefully that helps. And I will do my best to stop moving so much. We agreed on parameters, how we were going to set the agenda every week. We agreed on the meeting frequency, the meeting length. There were concerns about it going over. Here at CCL, we're always respectful of people's time, so we start and end those meetings on time. We were very clear on the mission of that call. We wanted it to be an active call. And we also agreed on confidentiality of who is in there. It's pretty clear. Not everybody wants the world to know they're doing this. And so if you are curious about who's in there, I will be respecting the parameters set by this coalition. I will be continue to do this, and I will not be sharing who is in this call. But so that's important. And the thing that is really important, every week, I need to plan ahead. I need to get that agenda out a day ahead of time, allow the people who are in the coalition call to provide feedback on that agenda. I need to resolve that feedback, and then I need to manage it. So this running a coalition takes time. It takes investment in the people who are on there. And the first thing on my mind is, how are they going to get value out of this call? How can I serve them? And how can I make sure that this time that they're spending, they find useful? So again, it started out with just 5 groups. It has grown. Now there are probably 20 groups. There are, I think, 10 congressional offices who are invited. We regularly have 6 or 7 who join us. And so as political opportunities have crystallized, as it became clear that a bipartisan bill was not going to be the way to move forward, it was going to be through reconciliation, we adjusted. We recognized the need for new voices on the call and organizations with power in different sectors of society. We invited them on. We had individual conversations with them to invite them, let them know what the culture that we've created for this call was, made sure they were invested in that culture, and we kept the format the same. So we still send out an agenda, allow input on that agenda beforehand, and then we stick to the agenda for the call, and we end those calls on time. And what this has meant for CCL, this has been an extremely valuable source of intelligence for us to provide insight for you as you plan your meetings, as you work within your communities. It's been huge. It's also been useful to get a common sense with civil society and with people on the Hill, elected representatives, their staff, of what's going on. So after something big hits the news, getting the interpretations of other organizations of people, that's been really valuable. And this also really helps us project leadership to a wide audience. And one of the outcomes is that groups who are on the call tend to call us first. And so if they have something juicy, they call us, and that's a real benefit of putting in the time every week to figuring out how do I provide value to the groups, the people who are going to be on this call, is we are the first one they call. And then through all of this, as I said, we wanted this to be an acting coalition, trying to inspire action from others on the call, get them to take actions that they otherwise would not have done. These have all been this coalition building of this effort to chart a course together towards a livable world. So next part, I do want to talk about inflation. This remains something that regular Americans are concerned about, members of Congress are concerned about. Certainly Senator Manchin has signaled this is a big concern of his. So let's talk about inflation, and specifically in the context of a carbon price. So first of all, what is inflation? Inflation is the decline of purchasing power, how much you can get for a dollar, as prices rise. And right now, inflation is at its highest level in 30 years. There are concerns over the potential impact a carbon price would have on inflation. And as I said, Senator Manchin said he will not support a package that risks hurting American families suffering from historic inflation. So let's look at what a carbon price might do for inflation. The bottom line here is that a carbon price, especially a carbon price that includes dividends returned to households, will address rising energy costs. A study from Columbia University modeling showed that the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act would add 2.4 points to inflation over 10 years. So that is 0.24% per year, which is far lower than the Federal Reserve's target of 2% per year. And a potential reconciliation carbon price would likely exempt retail gasoline to consumers. And gasoline is actually a really big part of the inflation story. And so if you're not raising it on gasoline, that particular version of the carbon price, which is, if anything goes through reconciliation, it's very likely to exempt gasoline. It's going to have even less of an impact on inflation. The long-term effects of a carbon price would guard against volatile oil and gas supply or prices that have contributed to the inflationary trend. Like I said, gasoline is a big part of the basket of goods that determines inflation. And so if we're not buying them, they're going to play a lower part. And so it's actually going to be good for inflation to get away from fossil fuels. And economists and analysts have said that the reconciliation package as constructed, this is, I would say, the $1.8 trillion version, will not add to inflationary pressures. And when you get outside of the modeling world, when you look at carbon pricing systems that are in place in Canada and Europe, what you find in the real world is that carbon fees have not raised inflationary pressures. In fact, if you look at, again, this is the Columbia Center for Economic Policy Research, carbon taxes do not have to be inflationary and may even have deflationary effects. So in practice, places that already have a carbon price, they found that no impact on inflation and maybe even a deflationary pressure. If you want to learn more about this, we have a blog here, How Will Carbon Pricing Impact Inflation? You can find it on our blog. I'm also including another blog here. This just went up last week, and there was a study that a lot of people were concerned about regarding the popularity of dividends. And the punchline here is that dividends with carbon prices are already popular, but if you include a dividend as opposed to something else, it doesn't necessarily make it any more popular. So some of the reporting on that missed that point that making polluters pay is already quite popular. So that's the main takeaway there. And so what's next? What are we going to do about this here at CCL? Well, this is about action. What we are asking you to do, we need to keep telling President Biden to meet his climate commitments. He is committed to a 50% reduction below 2005 levels by 2030. We want to keep that front and center. The more President Biden hears from us about that, the easier it is for him to stand up. The sense we get from the Hill is that it would be helpful if President Biden was a bit more active in the negotiations. And looking at our February action sheet, which is up already, it's going to focus on building power for climate action in your district. Since Congress is so busy, we have a little bit of leeway to focus on the district and pull some of the other levers of political will. We're going to be asking you to focus on visible media. So for example, letters to the editor, and to start planning safe spring events in your community. So as an emphasis on safe here, but the more people who are aware, the more people who can let President Biden know, who can say to their elected representatives, I want to see us address climate, the easier it is going to be for them to do that. So that's the action. And now we have time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. And how should we do questions?
Yeah, we've been trying to compile some questions in the chat. I've got a few collected, and I'm going to keep collecting them as we go. One question that someone asked is, people are concerned about exempting their retail gasoline from the carbon tax, lowering the effectiveness of the carbon tax itself. Can you elaborate more on this?
Yeah, Columbia University looked into that, and what they found is that over 10 years, it decreases the emissions reductions that they find by 1%. So even a modest carbon price, say $15, you would expect to increase our emissions by 10% in year one. And so over 10 years, with a modestly increasing carbon price, you would expect something on the order of a 40% emissions reductions just from the carbon price. And so, because by exempting consumer gasoline, it really goes down 1%. And so why is that? It seems a little bit incredible. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is that gasoline is the least sensitive to a carbon price of the fossil fuels because its price is already so high. So the relative change in the price of gasoline that you pay at the pump is going to decrease by, it's $1, it's 1 penny for $1 of carbon price. So if you have a $15 carbon price, you're talking about a penny on the gallon of gasoline. We have all very recently seen gasoline vary by more than $1 per gallon. And so the signal there is relatively small compared to the noise. So carbon price, you are going to need more policies to really decarbonize the transportation sector. So that's one reason. The other reason is people take a long time to replace their cars. Average lifetime of a car in the United States, I think, is 12 years. And so it just takes people more than 10 years, which is how long this study went out, to even replace their cars. So those are a couple of the big reasons why Columbia University found such a small impact of exempting consumer gasoline on our actual emissions reductions over that 10-year span.
Perfect, thank you. Another question we've been having is, we know that Tony Serna has been having conversations with stakeholders inside and outside of CCL. You mentioned some coalitions. What can you tell us about this process?
Yes.
And is there anything else we could be doing as volunteers to help?
Thank you. Yeah, I have also been helping with some of those calls. Madeline and Mark at the November conference indicated that CCL was interested in expanding our focus. We believe that we've gotten to a point of maturity where we can have more than one primary ask level policy at a time. And so before we do that, we want to consult widely. So we have been having initial conversations. We always respect the science here, and so we're starting with scientists, but we do want to include a broad slice of society. Certainly, environmental justice advocates have highlighted the need to contact them and to be consulted, and we want to do that in this process. But we are very early in that process, and so we are genuinely open at this point. We are interested in keeping the value of focus and what that is, how that is added to our power here. But that's generally where we are. So we want to talk to a lot of people, and we are starting with genuine openness, and that's what I feel like I can share at this point.
Thank you. The next question someone had is if you could elaborate on if any states are enacting carbon price legislation, and if they are, how are they working? I know we usually focus on federal, but people are curious about the states as well.
Yeah, there are already carbon prices at the state level in the RGGI system and in the California cap and trade program. There have been other efforts by other states to adopt carbon prices. Right now, I would say over the last year, with President Biden coming in, with Democrats taking over the House and the Senate, I think I have detected much less enthusiasm at the state level for state level climate policies. I think that's starting to shift again. My preference is that we even out this boom bust cycle depending on who is in control of Congress, who's in control of the White House. I would like to get to a point where we can maintain even pressure at the state level over time, but that we're not there yet. And so I think that we are at a point where we're going to see more interest in state level and local level climate policies up to and including carbon prices. But the last year, the focus has primarily been at the federal level. And so I don't have many updates there.
Thank you. A few of our volunteers are concerned about the carbon cashback being used to fund other climate measures, and if it's going to leave out low-income families if they do so.
No, I really don't think that that's a concern. So if you were to, it's a lot of money. So it raises a lot of money. And so you have to remember, I mean, the dividend was taxable in carbon fee and dividend. And the reason the dividend was taxable is because we already have is because of federal government required it to you couldn't do something that decreased the revenue for the government. And because we have a progressive system, the lump sum rebates, and because we have a progressive income tax system, by making the dividend taxable, you actually increase the amount of money going back to the poor. The wealthy, we're gonna create that. So the only reason you wouldn't be for a taxable dividend is if you don't like progressive taxation. And so the way you can still make sure that low-income and middle-income households get what they want and pay for this is you make the dividend not taxable, and you could means test it. And so one of the things that has been proposed is, of course, we've all had very recent experience with dividends since the pandemic started. There have been means tested. That means saying, you know, only low-income households get this, and the amount you're getting from the federal government for these COVID relief that decreases as your income increases. We got that 3 times, was it, during the pandemic? And so the federal government has a lot of recent experience in sending out checks to everyone and to decreasing the amount of check that you get as you climb the income scale. And so there are lots of ways to make sure that low and income households still end up with their full share of the dividend, so that they can bear the full cost of any. And the reality is that because they are already quote unquote carbon virtuous, the lowest 20% of earners account for only 9% of emissions. They're actually going to end up with more money in their pockets. So this is not a big concern.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question was a little bit away from policy, but we have some members that are concerned about how to address their GOP members that may have supported the January 6th events. Do you have any advice on them to how to remain kind of along CCL values for members that may have those kind of representatives?
I would reiterate our one rule, which is that if you're going to meet someone, you need to find something you genuinely appreciate about their record, and you need to be willing to express that to their face. Now, that started with an if you're going to meet them. You don't have to meet them. So since the attack on the Capitol on January 6th of last year, we have, as we always have, trusted our volunteers, and we put it to them. You can choose not to meet with your Republican representatives. That is your choice. Or you can choose to meet with them. And if you're going to meet with them, you have to follow our one rule. And we recognize that this is harder than ever, and it's harder than it should be. But our one rule stays the same. And so this is up to you. If you can't find it in yourself to meet with them, that's fine. In practice, the way that turned out, virtually all of our chapters decided, these members still have a vote card. They still vote to determine the direction of our country, and they decided that they would rather have their voices in there, resonating loudly with their countercultural appreciation and unexpected respect, and resonating all the more loudly for that, showing, I think, for many of our elected representatives, a different way of political discourse. They decided that was what they would prefer to do. That hasn't changed. It's still hard. It's still way harder than it should be. We still trust our volunteers to make that choice. But if you are going to go in, we still expect you to go in with appreciation and respect.
I think that's an amazing point to make, and something we all need to remember, that this is tough work sometimes. I guess that's most of our questions. I kind of wanted to finish off on, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience as we wrap up this session? Thanks
to everybody who's out there. This is an extraordinarily difficult time in American politics for a lot of reasons. And here at CCL, we are teaching a way that is really swimming against the stream. I think bridge building. This is the New River Gorge Bridge in West Virginia behind me. So a little bit of an accident, but bridge building and doing the hard work to find common ground, to be counterculturally appreciative, counterculturally respectful, to set that example, even though we really shouldn't have to set that example for a lot of our elected representatives. They have to get it from somewhere. Why not from us? So I'll leave you with that, and thank you to all of you who are willing to do that hard work of building bridges.